Hey, everybody, it's Bob Engel. We're on the Unheard Words podcast with my feature creature, if I may call you that, Rod Williams.
Yeah,
Uh, Rod and I were just talking. We've never met personally, we don't think, but we have traveled some similar trails in our walk. And I want my listeners to know you, Rod. You have a lot to offer, and there's a hunger uh, for those who are experienced, who've gone for. Matter of fact, do you remember Nancy Honeytree, the songwriter?
I remember somebody named Honeytree because that's an unusual name.
Yep.
What did
She
she
wrote.
write?
Well, I want to quote some lyrics to you. As a matter of fact, we'll intersperse some through the call. Her
Okay.
song "Pioneer." Pioneer, pioneer, keep pressing onward beyond your fear. Only the Father goes before you. To your own frontier. You're a pioneer.
Hmm.
And when I was researching, talking to you, I looked at things you'd written and things you'd posted and so on and so forth. But I had come across a new recording, a new YouTube of Nancy recording this recently, and I just went back to it and I thought how that applies to what I know about Rod and
Hmm.
what I want people to know about Rod.
Hmm.
Uh, so tell me a little bit about early on. I know you had a varied theological background. Give us a little rundown on that.
Well, at this stage, I feel, speaking of lyrics, I resonate with Larry Norman's song about I love you as we both crawl towards the lamp, and I feel like I've been crawling towards the lamp for a few years and given up a few times, and surprisingly, I think I've had some of my most profound encounters with Jesus in the times where I gave up, and so I had a pretty broad background. I came to Jesus in a small fundamentalist church in Southern California in the '60s, and it was your typical, fundamental Baptist kind of church, but it had a couple of people in it that um, well, I shouldn't say it that way. There were positive and negative things about it. They loved the Word of God and valued the Scriptures, and that's served me well over the years. But some of the theology, in hindsight, could use a little improvement in terms of the view of God. And just the tone of God as he was presented to us. But there was a person there who, in hindsight, I would say was a closet charismatic, probably. He
Yeah,
enjoyed Holy Spirit,
yeah.
and there was something about him that he just loved Jesus, and that was really Jesus in him is what attracted me to making a decision as best as I could at that point. For Jesus when I was about 15. And so that was my kind of introduction to church. I'd visited a few churches when I lived in the South as a child, but it was pretty, stoic. I don't remember a lot about it except these fans that people had with the picture of Jesus on it,
And
Uh,
the local funeral home, right? The
yeah,
the
in
local
local,
funeral home ad on one side and picture of Jesus on the other. Yeah, absolutely.
exactly. And it was on a family Bible we had, a very similar picture, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
talking about the big family Bible, so all I had was like Jesus's, kind of awesome and mysterious and distant. But this guy, he loved Jesus and came through, and uh, I, I said, well, I want that, whatever that is. And so I started to walk with him. Now, prior to that, uh, I grew up as a child in a small town in the South, rural South, and there wasn't a lot to do there, So I became interested in science and electronics, and that was kind of my hobby, right? And so I was still doing that. When I became a believer, though, um, it was explained to me that if you were serious about God, you were probably going to be a pastor or a missionary or a singer. And I couldn't sing, so and all the stories the missionaries told were pretty scary. I went to high school with a daughter of a missionary in a missionary child, and she had some pretty crazy stories. So I thought, well, pastor seems to be the safest of the choices there, you know. And I
Little
had
did you know, bro. Little
little
did you
did I
know.
know
Yeah.
the other dangers associated with that
Yeah.
we could take a lot of time going into. But anyway, so um, I went to Bible college, and it was kind of like there was that sacred secular divide. If I was going to share with someone, you know, some lessons from that, one would be that there is no sacred secular divide, as it turns out. You know, looking at this has been 50, 60 years ago now, you know. It's all Jesus, you know, he's everywhere. And
Yeah.
so, but anyway, I steered away from kind of technology that I was headed towards, and um, uh, got a college deferment. I would have been in the draft for Vietnam, which you're probably about that age.
Mhm.
And I went to Bible college, and I got a degree in theology. You mentioned from a small Bible college, and now there were great things about that. You know, I learned to, as I said, appreciate the Word of God, and I appreciated some of the history. But some of the history, in hindsight, that was missing were a lot of the great church fathers. You know, that we have come to appreciate through friends like John Crowder, Baxter Kruger, Francois, people like that. And so I kind of felt like I missed that a little bit, but I was headed on that course. I got sort of I did okay on that, you know, and I was doing speaking in high school, so it kind of fit with, you know, being a preacher or pastor. And I look at it now, and you know, I didn't really have much to say, but you know, I polished it up pretty good, and so I began to speak, you know, and function well in the religious system that I found myself in. So I wound up at a big church right out of college on staff, and that's a long story, but some things happened that discouraged me, that kind of disillusioned me from what that was all about. And so I remember telling Jesus, well, Lord, this is all I know. Uh, but if I don't think this is you, you know, it doesn't
Mm.
seem like this is your heart, the way things kind of operate here. So I'm quitting, you know, and I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm quitting. You know, it's like Peter, I'm going back to fishing or something, you know.
Yeah. We
So
go a fishing, man. I go a fishing,
yeah,
right?
right. And so a lot of folks our age, I probably have been through at least a couple times like that where they sort of gave up. And so I came back. That was in another state. I came back to California, and then I'm like in my mid-20s, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to have to make a living. So basically, I got back into technology in the early days of the personal computer, you know,
Hmm.
beginnings, and taught myself to program, and had a company that did some products for some big companies, and learned to program, was a consultant, did a bunch of things in technology. But along the way, you know, part of that time I'd given up, you know, and the surprising thing to me was those times where I gave up, it's like I felt Jesus more near than other times where I felt like I was working so hard for him. You know what I mean?
I
And
do.
that shocked me. And um, because my theology in what I had learned was telling me he should be distant because I'm not doing the right thing. But I just felt him near, you know. So he would trick me back into, you know, having a relationship with it. Can you relate to that?
I can. And, you know, I was in a conversation this morning with a brother, and we realized how often when we come to an end of ourselves, one way or another, it's preceding the next great thing.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I love to tell the story of David. And the only sermon I ever preached. I've never pastored a church, by the way, but I've had occasion. I've been ordained. Flo and I've been ordained for what 40 years. Uh, but only sermon I ever choreographed. Pastor had asked me to preach on Sunday, and Saturday afternoon, the Lord said, I want you to preach about David and Goliath, and I want you to go find 5 smooth stones. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find anywhere to buy 5 smooth stones. I finally found them in a creek bed. You know, the creek bed is the lowest part of the valley.
Mhm.
In order to pick those stones up, I had to get down on my knees. And the Lord showed me right there that if you're going to kill a giant, you're going to probably start out in the lowest part of the valley on your knees. Those 5
Good.
smooth stones, by the way, brother, let me submit this to you. The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, the ecclesia, and the man who's willing to be thrown into the situation. Last in, first out, bro.
Yeah.
Last in, first out. We were talking this morning about Jesus in the garden, man. He came to an end of himself. He could have literally bled out right there. We talk about him coming out of the wilderness. I mean, the stories would be countless. My big experience finally was I sat down on the edge of my bed with a pistol one day and said, God, you're going to have to help me. I can't handle this anymore. Came to an end of myself. So yeah, I totally relate to what you're saying, man. And I don't mean to interrupt, but I absolutely understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, and there's now I would look back and I would say that we really have 2 selves. We have a false self that religion and politics give us in the world, is trying to make something of ourselves in the system. Thomas Merton would say it's like we're invisible and we're trying to wrap enough stuff around us that we become visible.
Wow.
And and um, and so I look back on that now, and that's kind of what it was. But then as you get older, you begin to see, and you have enough of these experiences like we're talking about, where that's not working out for you, that you begin to find this other person that Jesus originally created,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
a lot simpler and a lot more peaceful, a lot more all basically the fruit of the spirit: love, joy, peace, long suffering, all the good stuff, right? And it's a lot less busy and tiring. And Jesus called it the easy yoke versus the light burden, or I'm sorry, the heavy yoke versus the light burden that he gives. And so, as long as we're still operating in that false self mode in these systems of religion and politics in the world, then there is no peace there. Jesus said, "In this world you'll have trouble, but take heart because I've overcome the world." He didn't say I was going to make the world give you peace or teach you how to live in the world to do okay. He just said he overcame it. And so I didn't. I think I'm just beginning to understand what that means a little bit. Unfortunately, late in life, but I I did had this career in technology, and that was all right. And then, but we were doing. Uh, I had this experience where I was like, I'm not going to tell anybody I'm a Christian, ever again. I'm done with all that. Occasionally we'd go to church, and um, you know, we did have some good experiences at Calvary Chapel. You mentioned Chuck
Mhm.
Smith, and that kind of changed my thinking that maybe God was better than I thought. And so I was kind of growing in that, but I kind of got tired of. We were all super evangelical, knocking on doors and all this stuff when I was younger, and I was like, I just can't do that anymore. But we began to see God's better, and we wound up at the vineyard and saw miracles, and we realized, oh man, that stuff still happens.
Wimmer,
And
man.
and and so uh, we'd still be involved in that, but a kind of a turning point was I had a boss that I worked for. I didn't have any credentials at that point to get into officially into technology or computing or whatever, but I had learned to program, and I worked for this little company doing electrical stuff for vehicles. And my boss was putting in a new computer system, or one of the guys in the same building putting in a computer system. He said, "Hey, we could use some help doing this. Would you be interested? We kind of got to be friends. But anyway, I went to work for him, but I'm like, I'm not talking about Jesus. I'm not doing anything, I'm done. And one day he comes to me and says, man, God's been talking a bit to me and I need to receive Jesus. And I'm like, okay, well, why are you talking to me? I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't want to mess this up, and because I felt like a failure. And of course, the accuser of the brethren loves to let you carry that, I'm a failure, I'm this,
Yeah.
I'm whatever,
Yeah.
all that accusation. Well, anyway, I said, why are you talking to me? He goes, well, I know you're a Christian. And I was like, really? Because I'm like,
What did I
I'm
do?
not, well,
Right.
I'm not saying anything. And I go, okay. And he goes, well, I said, well, then I'm like on the spot. And I'm like, well, you want me to pray with you? Because I was like, I know I should do that if somebody comes to me and says that. And he was, no, I know what I need to do. Just give me a few minutes and I'm going to go in my office and pray. So he does. And then he says, okay, me and Jesus, we have a relationship now. Then he starts reading the Bible and he says, I'm reading in here. It says that they got together and read the word and, they got together, the ecclesia you were talking about.
Yeah.
And there was this discipleship thing going on. He goes, I think you're supposed to disciple me. And I'm like, I don't do that anymore. What are you talking about? And he goes, well, you seem to know something about this, and okay, would you just read the Bible with me? Because I don't have any of this in my background. I don't know anybody. He's a very technical guy, ex-military guy. I learned a lot from him. And so anyway, we began to get together. And then he was like, well, we need to get my brother-in-law involved. He's got anger management issues. And I said, well, what do you mean he's got anger management issues? Well, let me give you an example. Somebody honked at him on the freeway the other day. He stopped in the middle of the freeway. He got out of the car, went in the trunk, got a tire iron, went and beat out every window in the guy's car behind him.
Whoa.
I go, oh, that does sound like some anger management
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah.
So then
That qualifies. Yeah.
I qualifies. Then I'm like, sounds above my pay grade, man. I don't think I. Anyway, so we eventually get together. His brother and brother-in-law gets saved, and pretty soon we're having a house church, again. Even though I'm determined to give up on all that. And so that was during the Calvary Chapel days. And long story. I mean, God just did things, and it's there's so one takeaway from all that time was, the more hands off we are, the more or less we're trying to do things, the more room there is for Holy Spirit to actually move and do things, because especially when we're not trying to take credit for it. And so we went through that period, and then uh, I had a period of time where we were my life kind of bottomed out. I became a single parent, lost pretty much everything. And I was a single parent, and I had gotten I had been doing consulting, but I thought, I need a stable job. So I got a job in a big high tech company. And right around 9/11, ironically, today's 9/11. So it's
Yeah. It
bringing
is.
back a few memories. So I was at this big high tech company. We were, anyway, 9/11 happened. It put a lot of pressure on us. Let's just put it that way. There's a lot of things we had to get done. And I kind of went down a rabbit hole of being isolated and working unbelievable hours. And I had felt I didn't have time to go to church or anything. I wasn't really connected, but I was going to church because I felt like I needed to. But then I kind of gave up on that. Well, finally, one day I wake up and I've got 3 teenage sons who are coming and going at all hours, and I'm working late, and I'm just like, I got to go talk to some adults. And any single parents listening can probably relate to that. You kind of get in your own little world trying to keep all the plates spinning. So I went to a single parenting class at another church. It was very kind people. They helped me a lot. And in the course of that, I met my current wife. This is like, gosh, 25 years ago now. And we kind of, she'd been through some hard things. She was from industry as well. And she had a second career as a math teacher. And anyway, we kind of loved each other back to some semblance of health is a good way to say it, I guess, you know.
Honey Tree's got a lyric that fits what you're saying here.
Yeah.
Uncharted wilderness stretches before you, and you drive on, going where no one has gone. Still, it gets lonely when darkness deepens. So sing by the fire until the dawn. That's exactly where you were.
Yeah.
And here
Exactly.
we are. The sun's coming up right here in this lady, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. Very beautiful. So, yeah, both of us were workaholics. We met each other at the end of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and found the fire and healing around Jesus, and we've helped each other come back to some semblance of sanity, or at least in the neighborhood of that, and some healing. And then we got involved in a little. I was still working for a while there, but I was, I was getting into my mid 50s and late 50s, and starting to get a little carpal tunnel from all the keyboard stuff. And
Yep.
um, anyway, having some health issues I won't go into. And we had a great pastor who did some premarital counseling with us and helped us a lot. And he says, Rod, seems like you need a transition, maybe this is time to do something else, because once you get senior in technology, you only get the really tough projects,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're between, uh, you're here and the ship date's here, and all the pressure's on you,
Yeah,
right?
all the scope creep and all the wow. Look what it'll do now. Why won't it do this and that? Right? I mean, the
Yeah, yeah.
three phases of a user. I'm very familiar with that. Yeah,
Sounds like you know a little bit about that. So
yeah.
so then I said, well, I'll go back to consulting for a while, and then only projects I would get is, you need a bottle of Pepto Bismol just reading the job requirements,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
but we got a 5 alarm fire here, a 3 alarm fire there. We need a guy to come in and put out all these fires and all that. So anyway, so finally, my pastor, my doctor's like, yeah, maybe this isn't the best thing for you. You're got all these things going on. So that was tough though, because that was my identity. It was like, in technology, I did pretty good, and you get used to, the feeling that comes from everybody looking to you for the answers and all that sort of thing. But anyway, my beloved wife uh, helped me make that transition. And
She unwrapped you, didn't she? I mean, you referred earlier to us being wrapped
yes,
in who we aren't.
that's very good. Very
Well,
good.
that came from you. It didn't come from me, man. And but she had a present and she decided to unwrap it, right?
Yeah, yeah, in
Yeah,
more ways than one, but we
right.
won't talk about that. anyway, anyway, so we helped heal each other. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we got involved in this little charismatic church, and basically I came to the gospel because I still needed healing. There was other traumas that came from that period of time. Anyway, it's hard to imagine, but there's a lot of people who were at work, right after 9/11, who had a lot of stress. Let's just put it that way.
Yes.
And 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 it's like anything else. You can't process it at the time, but you try to deal with it later. So anyway, we were healing from that. We had a friend who went to this crazy little charismatic church that had been going up to Bethel and seeing miracles and all these things. And she said, "Hey, you should come check this out." So I went there, and basically, God, taught me that He was much more real, much more immediate, much more loving. than even I had learned before, and he had warmed me up quite a bit, Um, but I began to have experiences, and I'll just one briefly was, we're in a room, and if you've ever been to charismatic meetings, people will be like, "Oh, there's a waterfall in the room, and the Holy Spirit's moving," and they start using all these extravagant metaphors. And of course, I was, an engineer, and I'm, technical guy and all this sort of thing, and my wife, was an engineer as well, so we're like, I don't know about this. But then I would begin to experience it. I would feel Holy Spirit, and I would all the things that Holy Spirit does, and I would object inside, and then I would hear the Lord say, "Rod, it's a metaphor. Get over it." It's like I remember when I said I was the bread of life, and I
Yeah.
was, the living water in me, and the Lamb of God. All those things. He goes, just get over it. It's a metaphor. Go with it. And so he began to loosen me up and participate in that. And there were some really kind people at Bethel that kind of saw a little bit about what was going on in me, and they would go out of their way to just help me experience what Holy Spirit was doing. And yeah, so we got exposed to that, and we ran into Georgian and Winnie Banoff, who are wonderful people, do a lot of amazing missions around the world and feed a lot of orphans and have a lot of joy. And I began to think, wow, God's a lot more joyful than I realized. I realized he was good before, but like it's okay to be happy.
Yeah.
And I came from a family that, working hard was your, you know, best thing you could do and the highest value and the most worth and all that. And so the idea that you could just relax and be happy was not, something I was familiar with. So anyway, so they introduced me to a lot of that. Then I met John Crowder, and he was just another over the edge on that, which was just what I needed. God has a way of giving us what we need when we need it, and he offended me in many ways. And we're dear friends now, and he still offends me on occasion, but in a good way.
Hmm.
And uh, and then I met Francois and the Mirror, and we started doing some online groups. And this was, if you think back 10, 12 years
Mhm.
ago, maybe
Yep.
15 now, I think you were part of that whole circle, right? And we were all having this discussion about the grace of God, and trying to figure out what that was and what it meant, and how it affected our doctrine, our thinking. And so John, and I skipped the part where John started a church in Santa Cruz, and we were pastors along with another couple for um, probably about 5 years. And then John moved up to Portland, and we were pastoring this church. So we said, well, what are we going to do? The church has kind of gotten started by having large monthly meetings. We'd have people from
Mhm.
Southern California, all over, even some international people come to it. So it was really more of a continual,
Con-
sort of
Conference.
conference
Yeah.
than a
Yeah.
than a church. But we did have a small local group that would meet in our house, and many of those people we're still friends with. And in fact, we've have adopted granddaughters sort of from that we have watched grow up and all. It was very, very tight knit group. But when they left, I'm like, well, what am I going to do? So we had made a list of like, well, if we were going to have anybody in, who would we have to speak at doing a monthly thing? And so we'd gotten to know Dan McCullum from the Mission. I don't know if you know him. He's a great teacher on the prophetic and music. And we had him in. We had Steve McVeigh. We had
Yeah.
Francois. We had Paul Young, who wrote The Shack. We had
Sure. No, Paul.
uh, all these different people. I'm probably leaving out some important ones in there. We had George and Winnie, of course, several times. They invested a lot in our little church, mostly because they liked the atmosphere. It was very drunk and very fun, I think. they, they loved us and they encouraged us, and I'll always be grateful to them for that. And anyway, we had several years of that. Then John and I had talked about we had done some schools when we had the church there, and we thought, what if we did like a summer where we got everybody together? So we did Cana New Line Seminary for 2 summers in Portland, where we had about each year we had about 75 people from all over the world come together, and we had some really amazing worship music. And then we John and I contributed our friends at this point. During that period of time, I met Baxter Kruger through a mutual friend. So we had Baxter, we had um, Francois, and I had known Paul Young from another mutual friend. We had Paul come in a couple times. Francois, Steve McVeigh, Jeff Turner, the Robes, all these different people, many of whom have been to Kansas City with some of your friends. And those years, these guys were doing tours, right? And we were part of that, part of one of the stops anyway. And many of the people who participated in those tours, we have stayed friends with now for a dozen years, because we all got to know each other during that time. So anyway, we did Cana, and it was a great success, and we almost didn't record videos, and Dano said, you never know. You guys are trying something completely new. Maybe something good will come out of it. Why don't you record it? So my wife recorded most of the videos, not very professionally, but the audio was decent because we had this big, ugly microphone, that one of the early ones that you just kind of pinned on, with a big blue light on it.
Yeah.
And Baxter still complains about that because it was so obnoxious in the videos. But and we did that for 2 years. We got, oh gosh, I don't know, a couple hundred hours of video. We took the best of that and turned it into an online school, and that's been going for about 10 years now. And so we got all these students. We just did a 10-year reunion, I think 2 weeks ago in Florida, with Baxter and John and me and a bunch of students. There's a lady there who's done a satellite school. And you were asking about, what are we doing now? That's one of the things that we do, is some of these events. We did a summer course on the Holy Spirit with John and Baxter. We did 12 weeks. It was really beautiful, and then it culminated in this meeting. So we've done some after Cana. We did some. We were always doing a little bit of itinerant speaking, but we went to Australia, South Africa, a few places, and made some international connections. Baxter helped with a lot of that in Australia, especially. And anyway, we began to get connected to this larger family. And you had mentioned Ecclesia, and I shared some of the previous movements that we've been in, and denominations, church, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's going on now, because the age of the internet, is people can be connected in a way that they weren't able to before.
You and I are a classic example of that right now.
Exactly.
When I was 15 years old, a funny talking guy from Massachusetts ran for president, and I was really impressed with him. And the Baptist church that I had perfect attendance in Sunday school for 10 years in started praying against him, not because he was a Democrat, but because he was a Catholic. And to a 15-year-old South Missouri boy, I didn't know the language, but I knew that wasn't right.
Yeah.
And it was also a pretty good excuse to sit out in the parking lot and listen to the top 40 radio, the top 10 of the week on Sunday morning, right? And
that you weren't supposed to listen to, probably.
No,
right?
Absolutely not. And I was out, and finished high school, went to college for a year, came home, started playing rock and roll and a good bass and a good band. Got up one Sunday morning when I was 18, thought, I ought to go to church. Put on a jacket and a tie, went to the First Baptist Church, was met in the lobby by a deacon. He said, "You were out in the bar playing rock and roll last night, weren't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You can't be playing rock and roll in a bar on Sunday night and come here on Sunday morning. You know, at the time I didn't have this language, but in retrospect, there was a lot more rock and roll in my soul than there was John Calvin. And
Well
and
said.
yeah, and so I walked away and I stayed away. I've learned since, by the way, that Brooks of Brooks and Dunn got kicked out of seminary for playing on weekends to pay his tuition. Willie Nelson got kicked out of seminary for playing in bars. I guess I was operating in some pretty big company and didn't know it,
There
man. I
you
mean,
go. Good tradition.
Married Flo. We've been married 56 years, 56 and a half years. Been a couple since February 22nd of 66. She had gone to church, but had really never made a decision. It was all right with me, man. I mean, this was the girl I loved. I wasn't any church involved in this deal, right? But when the kids were little, she came to me one day and said, our children should go to Sunday school and I won't take them by myself. I have a policy around here, Rod. I get the last word in, but it's usually yes, ma'am. You know what I'm saying? And so we started going to church, and it was nothing, but it triggered something in me, and then came the experience sitting on the edge of my bed, and we're kind of all in, or we're not in at all.
Yeah.
So we started going to a Baptist church, the only place I knew to go, and pretty good size one, 250 baptisms in one of the years we were there. Next thing I know, I'm teaching a Sunday school class. I'm going to Baptist lay witness weekends on the lay witness team. Flo and I both are. Flo, by the way, read the late great Planet Earth and said, I mean, Hal was completely off in left field. And Pastor Chuck, by the way, was right there with him for a long time, right?
Yeah.
but Flo said, I'm not right. I need to get right with God. And so on Palm Sunday of 78, the old pastor at the kind of secular church we were going to before we landed with the Baptists, who was filling in, said, we've sung our obligatory first verse of the hymn, the invitation. We're not done here yet, and started the second verse. And she grabbed me by the arm, dragged me down front, and we were in. We were in, and we were doing fine until they had me teaching a 30, 40-year-old couples class, and told me to teach the book of Acts, and we got to Acts 2. And the word from Dallas was the gifts of the Spirit aren't for today. And I just went to my pastor and asked an honest question. How can I teach this? Lord directed us out into a little charismatic environment. We moved there up in the country, one of those. We're involved in there for 13 years, and it went the way so many of those has gone.
Yeah.
It was beautiful and organic, and then it was organized and it became ugly.
Yeah.
Nothing ever grows on an organization, bro. It all grows on an organism. The gospel was
very good. Yeah.
And so we came out of there. We didn't know where we were going to go. It's just like you're talking. I mean, I remember the first song I wrote, by the way, was said, literally, there comes a time in your relationships are altered by the Lord, when time as we've known it come and gone, when the path that's set before us is different than the past, and it's on that day we must be going on. That was at 5:00 on a Tuesday morning. We had Tuesday night service. I took those lyrics to the pastor that night, and he said, man, these are great. And I said, they mean we need to leave. We didn't know where we were going.
Yeah.
Nobody ever does, Rod. Man, Abraham had it made.
Yeah.
I mean, Dad's an idol maker. How much better does it get than that?
Yeah.
You don't even have to really produce anything except images. This is high margin. You're a mystic. Nobody questions you because you're connected with the gods.
Yeah.
But it couldn't stay, man. You know, the second verse of Nancy's song. You travel light and you travel alone. And when you arrive, nobody knows but the Father in heaven. He's glad you can go, for those who come after you will need the road. I'm going to say something to you that I thought I might in the course of conversation, I thought I might say later, but I think we just need to go ahead and bring it out now. You not only study the church fathers, you are a church father. We are the Now Testament, brother. I mean, the brothers that we read and study and admire and recognize, they didn't know what they were doing, except the lame guys begging for food, begging for money, and the next thing you know, Peter's saying, "Dude, I don't have any money to give you, but such as I have, I give to you freely. Get up and walk." I think Peter had to be as blown away by that as anybody.
Yeah.
These guys never sat down, I don't believe, Rod, and said, "You know what? We're the church fathers, and 2,000 years from now, a couple of white bearded guys are going to be on a little screen talking to each other across the nation about us." I don't think they knew that. Matter of fact, they didn't even know where the sun went when it went down.
True.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so Nancy's last verse, and I'm not cutting this short, I just think it's the next place we need to go. I want to talk about the future. We've been talking about what you're doing now, right? Have we covered what you're doing now? I want to
Pretty
do that.
much.
I want to,
There's a couple
yeah,
other things I should mention.
yeah, do that.
One, before I forget, I had a similar experience when I went to Calvary in losing all my Baptist friends because of cessationism, right? And
Yep.
that's still a dividing line, and a lot of people go through that. And that was part of my argument with the Lord when I began to encounter things that the Holy Spirit still did. Was in the back of my mind, my education, such as it was, told me that none of that happened, And interestingly enough, about 2 years ago, I ran into a guy who worked at that church I mentioned when I was out of college, and he heard the shack was heresy, and he hated all that, and he succeeded. He kept going in the denomination that I fell out of early. And anyway, he had been trying to find me for a while because we were friends during that time I was there. And anyway, long story short, someone tricked him into coming to hear Paul Young preach, the guy he thought was a heretic. And he just got melted by the love of God. And
Yeah.
then he was like, "Man, I've been wrong about so many things, And anyway, saw a picture somewhere. He came to a meeting that Baxter and I were at, and we reconnected. And so there's a lot of people that go through that, and this is part of the enemy's strategy, right? Is that don't get too excited about what God does. Don't take Acts 2 very seriously, right? Don't believe in miracles because not everybody gets healed. Well, that's true. Not everybody you pray for gets healed, but if you don't pray for anybody, nobody gets healed. And everybody knows somebody who's been healed. They're just afraid to talk about it because of cessationism and everything else, right? Or they know things that they can't explain were improved, and often when somebody prayed for it. So yeah, I can totally relate to that. Now, some of those I had conversations too with leaders, and they were like, "Yeah, I know that's true, but I'll lose my job basically if I don't teach cessationism." Which the guy was honest. I got to give him that, but that's where a lot of it comes down to: is people won't believe God's better because their employers, the denominations, are organized around a limited view of the goodness of God.
Paul Young
And
says that the two most powerful hermeneutics today are peer pressure and job security. And
very well said.
yeah, he's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, we were in one church for 13 years, came out, didn't know where we were going. The Lord clearly directed us to another one. We were there. Goodness, we were there 14 years. At one point late in that time, I sat in that pastor's office and watched him make that decision. And I wasn't putting pressure on him. I just went to him with something the Lord had sent a young brother, a young missionary. He was coming out of the field. He wasn't going back. He wasn't selling books. He wasn't trying to raise money. He was invited to come on a Wednesday night. And he just said, "Here's what I've seen in the mission field. Why isn't it happening here?" Not condescendingly. It was,
Yeah.
it was a beautiful word.
Yeah.
And I went to the pastor the next day and I said, bro, we got called out. What are we going to do? And he said, well, it's really clear that God spoke to you. And I said, brother, the brother didn't come to my house. He came to our house at your invitation on
Yeah.
Wednesday night when the core
Yeah.
group's here. What are
Yeah.
we going to do? And you watch a man who's opted out of Social Security. He's 60 years old. He's been buying houses ever so often with this housing allowance and building equity and building equity and building equity. That's his retirement because he's a non-denominational guy, and so he doesn't have the presbytery somewhere building him a pension. And you watch him do something that my friend Brian Zahn I watched do. You watch him push back. My friend Brian Zahn, who I've known, I was never in the catacombs with him, but the first time I went to Word of Life Church as a visitor, I was in his living room. I remember the $7,000 building they bought from the Methodist in South St. Joe, and then the space that they leased from American Family that had been the secretarial pool, big open space. And then the building that they built that my friend Jimmy Brasher oversaw that they spent $10 million on. And BZ got up in 0405 time frame and said, this word of faith I've been preaching is making God small.
Yeah.
And lost half his congregation.
Yeah, exactly. If you change, it costs you, you know, and it's just part of, again, the strategy of the accuser to keep God small. And I love Brian, and I've only met him a couple times, but you give him a hug for me because when he waxes strong on Christology, man, it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
amazing, you know.
I went through in the winter of 09 and 10. Lord told me it was time to leave, and man, I'm loyal to a fault. I mean, I was playing lead guitar on the worship team, and Sunday school superintendent was the guy that visited everybody in the hospital. My consulting practice gave me that kind of time, and so I did it. I mean, we're all in, right? And I got deep enough in the valley, brother, that Flo got rid of everything toxic in the house. I mean, and I won't talk about how bad it was because I wouldn't even tell her some of the things that I went through.
Yeah.
But coming out the other side, I called BC one day. I had been in a pastor's meeting in Kansas City right around that time, a little earlier, a little bit before that, as a matter of fact, where he'd stood up and said, I'm packing my bags and leaving the evangelical movement. It's about 150 evangelical pastors in Kansas City there. And that was on a Monday, the Saturday night before. I had caught myself on the floor in my living room in the middle of the night saying, God, what's wrong with me? All of a sudden, I'm not offended by things that should offend me.
Yeah.
And I went to him. I said, dude, were you in my living room Saturday night? I said, you just read my mail, you know. But in 14, I went to him. I said, what's going on? Up in his office, and he's got a big stand-up desk up there with a big Bible on it. He's standing in front of that Bible waving his arms, and he said, it happens every 500 years. We shouldn't even try to name it. Don't even try to name it. Just get in it and stay in it. It's going to outlast us, but that's what we want. Yeah. And I had come out, and no, I wasn't in the circle. I found Google Blogger and started expressing myself sometimes pretty vigorously on the internet. I didn't know where to go, and the Lord kept bumping me into people and bumping me into people and bumping me into people. And Francois was one of those people pretty early on. Facebook has been church to me, man, in many cases. Certainly Zoom calls are.
Yeah.
So
There's so much going on now. In things like this, you know, different people doing podcasts, and we also, you know, you're asking what we're doing now. We're part of a school called School of Kingdom that Dub Alexander, Ryan
Dub
Penna,
does, yeah, I know Dub.
and
He was the first feature creature on my first call, by the way, was Dub, just so you'll know.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I really relate to Dub. You bet.
All right. And Dr. Tony Robinson, they're all part of that. Anyway, I teach the alumni a couple nights a week. And so everybody's come out of something, you know. I appreciate your story. It sounds like you were in tech as well, right? So you came out of
I
that.
was I was not a coder, but I was a guy who could sit down at a president's desk who didn't even have a terminal on his desk, and
Uh,
and legitimately convince him. I was an early player in document imaging, for example, when we were actually
okay.
all of a sudden we were scanning and turning up JPEGs and PDFs
Yeah.
and then we were workflowing it with FileNet and KeyFile
Yeah.
and some of those products that you're familiar with. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
back in the late '80s and then up into the '90s. I was part of a startup that was heavily involved in that. Yeah,
Right. So you had the experience of growing with an industry and, you know, and being a part of that and the self-esteem that comes from that,
yeah,
you know, and so it's a big deal to come out of that, right? And then it's a big deal to come out of uh, your denomination, whatever it is, because you get good at it. You get to where you're getting self-esteem from that as well. And some of that's good. I mean, God uses everything. I don't want to be too harsh on that, but I think Brian is right. And I mean, I probably had a similar conversation like you had with Brian on both sides of the table with different people over the years, that we are in something right now that the that I think is wonderful because it's not top down, maybe for the first time, because the communication is not top down anymore,
yep,
and it's much more multi-point. Um, it's not one to many; it's many to many. You know, you from a computer standpoint, and so there's this opportunity to hear different voices and synthesize truth, or let the truth synthesize you is maybe a better way to put it, to where you begin to see a bigger picture of who God is, and you begin to see a bigger narrative of what's been going on down through time with the church and with the world and everything else. And we are in the middle of something. And so you were asking about what's going on now. I don't know, man. I feel like I just get up and hang on every morning, and I go from one thing to the next, and I don't try to analyze it too much anymore or control it, because it's there's life in, you know, in the spirit that is way beyond all the stuff I was trying to do. The harder I try not to build anything, the more stuff happens, you know. And uh, you know, Crowder always jokes about, I've tried to kill my ministry so many times, you know, and it just won't die, you know. And he's worked pretty hard at it, because I've been around and I've gotten some of the you know, collateral damage from some of his efforts to do that. But there's something going on that's so beautiful. I mean, we were I 2 weeks ago I was at two different meetings, 2 weekends apart. One of them was you know, the Rethinking God with Tacos guys,
conference, sure, yeah,
Jason and
Jason Cart,
Derek.
yeah,
And so they had a conference,
yeah, I'm very familiar with that.
and so I met them a couple years ago when that was just getting started, and they were like finding people that, some of which you and I probably knew a little earlier, like Francois and different people, but they were intent, like, we're going to like interview everybody who's part of whatever this thing is, because it just felt so fresh and different and new to them. And so anyway, they were going to have this at some point. A bunch of us were saying, well, you know, you should get everybody together at some point, right? So they did this conference, and we were doing a conference in Florida the next weekend. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go early just to hang out and see who comes to this sort of thing, you know. And it was beautiful because there were people from all these different streams, many of whom
Yeah,
who didn't know each other. There
yeah,
were people that were acquaintances online, like you, for many years, and like John Young. I don't know if you know him. He's anyway. He posts a lot of great stuff. And anyway, it was just beautiful. It was like a family reunion where people had never actually met each other. If you can understand what I'm saying.
like
They're
discovering cousins from like your DNA brought you all together. How about?
exactly,
Yeah,
and
I got you.
we're all having conversations like you and I are having right now, of like, I was in this, and the Lord brought me out of that, and I discovered this, and I read this guy, and it affected me this way. So it's a beautiful family life that's going on, right? And then the next weekend I'm in Florida, and there's this lady, uh, uh, Therese, who's for the last, I guess, I don't know, 5 or 7 years, she's taken the Cana videos. She'll get a bunch of people in her living room. They'll watch them together. They'll talk about it. It's a form of church, right?
Yeah.
And so she's been doing this for a while. And she invited us out, and we did this summer course. We had I don't know, several dozen people sign up for this thing. We did it for 12 weeks, and then we all got many of them got together with us in Florida. And then there were other people from like Dub School that came, and then there were a bunch of people. I don't know where they came from. There's some guy who flew over from England, and so there's a gravity to the gospel, the real gospel. Like,
Yeah.
if looking back now, what was the missing element in all those church experiences we had? It was a little thing called the gospel. And what is the gospel? Well, the gospel is, who Jesus is, what he accomplished, who we are in him, how we view others, right? Very simple. Uh, and we're rediscovering the simplicity and the centrality of Christ. And I love what Brian says about everybody's talking about deconstruction, but it's really restoration. Deconstruction is we get a bulldozer, knock everything down, and go, "Wow, that wasn't good." But reconstruction is, he says, it's like the great paintings of Jesus and all the biblical scenes and
Yeah.
the great churches that have soot over them. You probably read the same article you wrote that I did. And he goes, you painstakingly remove that till you see the original image. And I think that's really what's going on. And what's beautiful about that is it's not like any one person is saying, well, I've got this great new insight, come hear my insight and it'll be awesome. And you'll, whatever, like all these different movements we had were because some guy had a different angle on it, and they were doing their best to try to find Jesus, and they usually found something, some aspect of it. But what's beautiful is people are coming back and just beholding Jesus, right? And when you do that, you begin to read all the familiar scriptures completely differently, don't you? Because you don't have these lenses that were given to you. Well, miracles don't happen, so I have to skip over that.
Right.
Or, God's really also wrath, so I can't get too excited about his love. And yeah, we're forgiven, but he's still judging us. All these conflicting ideas, all this cognitive dissonance, a lot of that's going away, and people are beginning to discover, oh my, he really is good. It's really okay to be at peace. We don't have to live with a conflicted mind. And oh, by the way, that changes something in me. I become more loving. I become more real. Uh, you know.
I had a little stint in the hospital last winter, and there's so many things that come out of what you're saying. Um, but I'm on a call with Matt Pandell and some guys on a Sunday afternoon, and I said, a nurse came in the door of my room, and I said, God, excuse me, guys, one of my congregation just walked in, and it occurred to me what I just said.
Yeah.
See, I've been on the phone today with homeowners and builders and subcontractors and brothers. For that moment, they're part of my congregation.
Yeah.
And if I see them that way, not that I'm higher, not that I know more than them, but that 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 my goal, what would you do with your congregation? You would find a way to relate to them in a way that makes their life better. I came that you might have life and that more abundantly, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, one of the guys I talked to today, by the way, that really fits in what you're saying about whole deconstruction, reconstruction thing. Interesting guy here in Lawrence, Kansas, got out of the financial world about 25 years ago. Just didn't think he was doing anything for society. And he and his brother had a little carpentry background. His brother was a trim carpenter, and he had some background, and so on and so forth. And they started buying old houses that were in bad condition and not flipping them, but restoring them.
Mm-hmm.
And in some kind of gin mill flipping thing. He's done, in the last 23 years, he's done 112 houses. But but in a town of 100+ thousand people, not including the students, he has taken the old bones. I literally said to him at one point, man, you're like raising up the dry bones, man. He's taken the
Yeah.
old bones and put life back in them.
Mm.
And I see that happening. We can't call it a movement, bro. Let me submit and forgive my crude analogy, but the only part of a body that I know of that has a movement is the bowels. We
Yeah.
we 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 can't. One of the things BZ said is we can't name it, because when you start naming it, when you start calling it something, what do? You start going back to what you talked about early in the conversation. You start putting a wrapping around it.
Yeah.
And what we have found is the pure and simple good news. Jason Clark, I love, he says Jesus is perfect theology, right?
Mm-hmm.
We find the perfect example of God in the man Jesus.
Yeah.
And for the first time in history, we have completely distributed processing to get that out. I read Neil deGrasse Tyson said the other day there are 6 billion internet connected devices. Now, some of those are servers and stuff, but there are countries that have never had a telephone pole in them where everybody has a smartphone.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have a, by the way, you'll be happy to know that this recording will be on Rethinking God with Tacos in the morning.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Great.
well, that's one of the two. I'll put it on my blog. So, but this will go in, and I have a 9 o'clock call on Thursday mornings with Dale Howie and a bunch of guys out of Rethinking. I have a
Mm-hmm.
Sunday afternoon call on Tuesdays. I have a call with a bunch of people out of BZ's church. It's a Zoom call we call the Upper Zoom. And yeah, I thought you'd like that.
That's perfect. That's
And
perfect.
we review Brian's sermon from the previous Sunday, go over that. And
Yeah.
this is kind of a new thing for me. I'm about 12 or 13 of these now. But I want to say to you that you live in a big tent.
Mm.
And I mean, you got guys like Dub and Baxter and Brad Jerzik and Jason Clark, and John Crowder and Francois and Paul Young and a host of others. And those will be added to, by the way. There's going to be somebody that hears this that says, "Wow, what's this guy doing?" And the next thing you're going to do is get friend requests, or they're going to come to something you have, because you do have something. You make me think of old John when he got back from Patmos. And man,
Baxter and I talk about John and Patmos because you wrote a whole book on that, right?
he did. And picture this: here you are, you're having your meeting, you're all getting together, your ecclesia, whatever it looks like, and this old dude shows up, and matter of fact, he probably needed help getting there. He'd had a pretty rough life by then, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, somebody says, "You know who that is? That's the one Jesus loved.
Mm. Yeah.
That's the one. That's the one that showed up." And so they go to him and they said, "Man, they got to be the ultimate apologist, right? I mean, tell us everything. Tell us everything we know." And he said, "Love one another."
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. He has the simplest language in the New Testament because he didn't want to be misunderstood. And he wrote John late in life. And I wonder what we'd be missing if John's testimony wasn't, in there and what he had to say.
I submit to you that if the only book we had was Gospel of John, we'd be fine.
Yeah.
Maybe better off. I mean,
Maybe.
maybe we'd have more Theo and less ology. What do you think? Would that be a possibility?
Yeah. Well, the early church didn't have a New Testament. That's what people, they get all excited about.
Yeah, yeah.
And we got to honor the word, but they understood the Logos before they had the Graphe. And nowadays we've conflated the Graphe, the written word, with Logos, the living word, Jesus. So much so that we can't see who Jesus is many times because we've got all these little verses that we've strung together to form some glasses that distort our vision of him, you know.
Mo
But
Thomas calls it the paper pope. I'm
yeah,
sorry, but that's yeah. And
yeah.
I love it. I even love the King James. I mean,
Oh yeah,
I
they're all good.
it speaks
Read
to
them
me,
all.
man.
Read them
Oh,
all. People
yeah,
say, "What's your
absolutely.
favorite translation?" Read them all.
Yeah,
You know, Francois. People get all upset about that. Well, don't. He would be the first to say, "Read them all." You know, he's not trying to, you know, be the final, ultimate, only translation. He's just saying, "This is my take on it." And every translation is a paraphrase, and we got to get out of this thing of the if you know I have a couple friends who are United Nations translators and they translate, like I have this one friend, she's amazing, she speaks like 6 languages so fluently that we had like a Russian in from when we were doing Cana and she was translating and the guy at the end goes, well, where were you born in Russia? And she's like, she's from the UK, you know, sweet little
yeah,
British girl. And but anyway, she would say, you know, you never go word for word. You're trying to go concept. You're trying to communicate, and 2 different translators will say 2 different things, trying to get communicate what's going on. And people don't get that. If it was a science, every translation would be identical, but they're all different. And we have a few friends that get a burr under their saddle online about that, but they're all paraphrases. So get over it. You know, it's a translation is a marketing term because every denomination solidifies around a translation. They make money off of the translation. It's
yep.
their particular one. But just read them all, and you'll get. There's even like a 23 translation you can get where it'll take verses and you can read them all in parallel. You'll get subtle differences in there. And that's one of the things I think is happening in this thing. And I agree, let's not name it. Whatever's going on, which is his business, right? That we're all participating in, his family that we're participating in, is we're beginning to discover to value what's revealed in the word above the words themselves because we all want to be lawyers instead of lovers. You know, we want to get all the language right so we can win our case and brag about we know it better than everybody else, but many times we're just getting ideas and concepts and not the underlying relationship and view of the person of Jesus. But I think that's changing, and we're beginning to see that. And these communities that you're talking about, this loose association of people, the only unifying thing is that vision of Jesus. And as long as you're hanging on to your denomination or that you're something, you know, the false self, as long as you're trying to feed that, you're it's hard to see this. You have to sort of be desperate enough, have lost and banged your head against the wall enough that you've quit that. And we're all still learning to do that. I'm not saying I've perfectly let go of all that, but when we get to a point where we're the only thing that matters is what who he is, what he said, the fact that he's in me saying that and living that. He's life, he's the living water from within. It's the real thing, and it's mystical. It's beyond uh, trying to capture in words or doctrinal statements or anything else. And I'm I'm a technical person. I love specifications. I love outlines, all that, and I have supposedly have a degree in all of that. But um, you know, that didn't help me at the bottom of my experiences in life, and I didn't spend a lot of time there, but I had some pretty dark times. What helped me was seeing Jesus right here when I'd given up and I knew I'd failed. I knew all the verses that told me I was wrong. And I knew that he was right there in the middle of that.
You're
And
you're in the perfect place. You said it earlier. I get up every morning and I don't know what's next.
yeah,
You know, when nothing's certain, bro, everything's possible.
Very well said. That's a good one.
And that you aren't burdened with a big operating system. I'm a Chromebook guy, by the way. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't have 20 gigs of graphic MS DOS sitting on my laptop, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
fires right up and it shuts right down and everything's
Yeah.
out in the ether and
Yeah.
I love it. And
Yeah.
we just go for it. Somebody said to me 20 years or so ago, man, I'm afraid I'll miss God. And I heard myself say, he's a really big God. If you'll turn your face toward him, he's hard to miss. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. You're in
And
the middle of him.
it's all around you. I mean, and his eyes are looking to and fro for a guy who'll get up every morning and say, okay, what are we doing today, Lord? You know,
Yeah.
I don't have an agenda here, Lord, except your agenda.
Yeah.
Which would be Jesus saying, I only do what the Father tells me, man. I don't have an agenda here. Oh, the chief priest's daughter is dying here in Capernaum, and I have an opportunity to make a big show and go heal her. But somebody touched me. Wait, Lord, you can't stop for this unclean woman. Oh, no. I felt virtue.
Yeah.
I felt virtue flee from me. And eternity healed her.
Yeah.
And then he goes to the house, and he won't let anybody in the room but the parents, and he raises that 12-year-old daughter, by the way. That would be her bat mitzvah, by the way. Think about that. He raises that 12-year-old daughter and says, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
This isn't a show.
Yeah.
This is not knowing what's next.
Yeah. And so we're in this period where I feel like we're all kind of learning to finally listen to the Spirit in their true sense of the word, and try to follow the priorities of the Spirit. And sometimes you have to make adjustments that you don't want to make, in your schedule and things like that. I've had to do that recently, but it's there's so much good going on out there. And if we kind of give each other grace and we encourage each other and we stick to what's important, um, man, it's exciting times. You know what I mean? And we're in a world that needs something authentic, that needs what Jesus originally promised more than ever. And um, let's not. The good news is we don't belong to anything, so you can't get kicked out of most of this. Uh, but there there's great things going on, and we just I love all the loose coalitions that are forming, and somebody comes up with an idea, hey, let's do this or let's do that, and so yeah, it's exciting times, and I love what you guys are doing. I know Dale a little bit, and of course Jason and those guys, and um, just met Derek a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, good brother,
Yeah,
man. He and I were
yeah,
texting early this morning. You bet.
yeah, and we're seeing Paul and Baxter this weekend for something out in
Yep.
California.
Yep.
So there's like this family that we see each other from time to time, but there's this connection that's based on Jesus, and it's not about celebrities like it used to be. Like if you get to know people who are working hard at all this, they're working hard at all this. You know what I mean? Not in their flesh, but I mean just to keep up with the schedules that they have, and all of that is hard. And yet there's a grace. You know what I mean? That comes with them because it's real. And like one of my I was blessed to meet Paul Young. Gosh, right after the shack came out through a mutual friend. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't have happened. But what's been fascinating to me is to see what God's done with him since then, because of all the opportunities that opened up. And he could have just quit doing all that, and one time we'd had him out to speak a couple times, and other friends of ours in the area, and we kind of try to organize a little few meetings for him and stuff. One time I asked him, I go, Paul, like all these things have happened. Why do you even keep doing this? Because you see how hard somebody works to do all this. Most people don't realize that to do an
Oh
hour
yeah.
talk somewhere, you've
Yeah.
traveled many times, 2 days.
Yeah.
You're away from your family, you're up
Yep.
late, you're changing time zones, you're going through airports, which is no picnic anymore, doing all this stuff. I said, why do you still do this? And he's like, well, he goes, I don't know. He goes, somebody asks and I have to make a decision. And I ask the Holy Spirit, like, should I do this or not? And most of the time, the Holy Spirit says, yeah, you should do that, and he does. And he just keeps going. But he's been doing this for years now, and it's changed him as a person, and same with any of the guys that we mentioned. Francois worked so hard for so many years. He would have in hundreds of pastors from all over Africa, and he would pay for them for a week to have food and lodging, and he would give away everything he was translating, and then he would give them gas money to go back. So much so that he was broke for many years. And a bunch of people got around him about a dozen years ago or so and started to help him say, you got to get this translation done and stuff. And so a lot of these people, they're working harder than you realize. You might think of them as something other than who they really are, some celebrity or something. But this is the most genuine thing. I've been like you in church, quote unquote, for gosh, 50, 60 years. And I feel like I'm just beginning to see what it was supposed to be, what it could have been. And the internet has helped that a lot, and there's a lot of bad things about the internet, but it's been used to connect people that would otherwise never be connected, to hear voices that they would never otherwise hear, and to change more quickly than they probably would have otherwise. So we're all participating in that, and I'm excited about where it goes from here. I keep retiring. I'm supposedly retired, but I got to retire from my retirement.
I wrote a song, "Are You Willing to Be on Fire?" And one of the lyrics is, Elijah was a prophet of the Lord. Called down rain, he called down fire by God's holy word. He burned and slew Baal's prophets, and he never did retire. He got a ride to the other side on a chariot of fire. That's where you want to go, bro. You know,
You
what
got to
was
go.
man, that was Rod leaving, man. What NASA will be they'll be measuring it at Rice University. What happened on the Richter scale down here, man? Nancy wrote this song, and I want to go back to the chorus of it. And when I typed it in here, I put in capital letters "word." This isn't me giving you a word, bro. This is a beautiful woman that took a guitar and had the nerve to finger pick in churches in the 70s, early 70s. This is a Larry Norman, Keith Green, Dallas Home, hanging out with those people, gal.
Yeah.
And here's the lyric, and it's a word to you, bro. Pioneer, pioneer, keep pressing onward beyond your fear. Only the Father goes before you to your own frontier. You're a pioneer.
Mm.
You are a major player, and you don't know where it's going, and I don't know where it's going, but I want to tell you, brother, you're a major player to get it there.
Mm.
And the fact that instead of having a formula, you're just open to take the next step. The fact that when you see a bush on fire, even though you've got it made, even though you've gotten away with murder, even though you've married the sheik's daughter and he doesn't have any sons, you just have to turn aside and see what it is. And that was first thing, by the way, that happened there was that God said, you're on holy ground. Bare your souls, brother. Take your shoes off.
Mm,
but that delivered the people.
mm.
And you're one of those guys, Rod. You really are.
Well, thank you for the encouragement, Bob. I feel like I identify a little bit when Paul says, "I don't even evaluate myself anymore." I don't know. I really don't. I don't. I just, like I said, opportunities come up. We try to do those, and it, there is something going on. It's like in the moments when you can talk with somebody who's had a similar journey like you realize that all the boasting, Paul talks, there's no boasting except in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
cross of his grace. So I appreciate the encouragement. I would say I can't just knock one of my earphones out here. as if as if I wasn't unceremonious enough.
Well, here it goes. Now we can't publish this, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's not perfect anymore.
no, I really appreciate the encouragement. I do, and I've known you. I'm so glad we got a chance to chat because I appreciated what you posted and your contribution to kind of this online community, whatever we want to call it, over the years. But um, yeah, I don't even know how to gauge it. And this is the conversation where I was headed with that. It was with other friends who are kind of in this journey together and observing all this. There really isn't time to rank yourself or try
No.
to figure it out. Sometimes it's even hard to receive encouragement, which it shouldn't be, but it's sometimes you're like, well, I don't want to think this way or that way, but there is something that we're part of, and we're very blessed to live in this day, and you're part of that, and so many of the other friends that we mentioned, and many people who are supportive and doing things. I don't know. It's a wonderful family, and we should probably pause to appreciate it. That is real ecclesia. I think we talked
Yes.
about that earlier.
Yes. Yes.
It is real. Um, Baxter sometimes says, we're still in the early days of the church.
Yeah.
And we think about it as centuries ago, but we're just figuring it out. We're not we're slow on the uptake sometimes, as humans, and we're just beginning to see what could be. We're beginning to see through the idea of separation, right, and distance, and an angry God, and all these bad theologies. Dub's really good about
Yeah.
that. Change your theology, change your world. So we're just beginning now. So what's possible once we have a generation who hasn't operated in those limitations, but they have some picture of the goodness of God as their starting point, and not the baggage that you and I have had, right? All the cessationism and all the control and denominationalism and trying to make a name for ourselves and all that stuff. Um, wow, imagine what's possible.
Eye has not seen, ear has not heard, yet it's
Yeah,
not entered the heart of man what's possible. And it's not just possible.
yeah,
It's it's prophesied.
yeah,
It's gonna happen. And
yeah.
you know, don't ever bother to evaluate what I said to you. Just one of these one ever so often when you need it, remember it.
I
Just
appreciate
remember it.
that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And you're yeah, God's faithful to give us that encouragement when we need it, and I receive that, and I appreciate it. And um, I hope we get a chance to connect in person at some point. I've been talking to. We've had some requests, to come back to Kansas City with some of the things that happened there, and
Yeah.
so maybe that'll happen. I think Kansas City has a rich history on so many levels, in all of this. So anyway, there's some people who, if I could remember their names off the top of my head, I would say hello to, but you know who they are better than I do.
They know who they are.
Yeah.
So we don't have to, man. It's not that our memory's going; it's that our hard drive's full. Okay, I
There
mean,
you go.
we
There
just
you
got a lot
go.
of data up
Just
there,
need
you
to
know. Yeah,
rearrange some stuff. There
yeah.
you
We
go.
need to frag the disk once in a while, right? You know,
That's it. Yeah, that's right.
yeah, yeah. I can't tell you how much I appreciate knowing you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being on this call. I'll get it out where 7,000 or 8,000 people can see it, or maybe more. I don't know, but I'm kind of convinced that in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus didn't have a PA system. There's 5,000 people. They're outdoors, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like everybody heard it all.
Yeah.
I always pictured him walking among the crowd. He didn't speak from the platform. He never did.
Yeah.
I picture him walking among the crowd, and as he said things, he was walking by that part of the crowd that needed to hear that part.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah.
And and I know that'll happen with this, man. I know that'll happen with this, man. Where can people find you? I mean, you're all over Facebook, and that's great. They can find you there. Where else should they look for you?
Well, we're on the GAN network,
Yep.
GAN TV. We
Yep.
only have about 6 episodes up, but we're going to have a lot more content, some longer form content now that they're supporting that as well. We do have a series on there called What is the Gospel, or Our Treasure in the Gospel, which is 6 episodes on who Jesus is, what he accomplished, who we are in him, and
Okay.
how we view others in light of that. I'd encourage people to check that out. And we're on Facebook as Rodeen Williams, Rodeen. That's Rod plus Eileen. That's my wife and me together on there. And we post something almost every day. That's, we try
it's
to
rich.
stick to some Christological stuff, some encouraging stuff. And then we're on X as Delta Kinos, DeltaKinos. And we have a lot of videos out there. I don't have a website. Like I said, I haven't been working too hard trying to build something. I need to get a little more organized because we have more content now, but it's scattered all over places we've spoken and whatnot. We do have some really old stuff on Bliss Coco on YouTube, BLISSCOCO. Also, Francois on there, Baxter, Paul Young, a bunch of people. So
Text me those sites, and I'll stick them up so that people see them in writing.
Okay, cool.
And yeah, it's rich out there. AI is going to find all this stuff, at some point.
Oh yeah.
There's going to be a whole technology that's going to put us in front of people that we have no way of imagining we'll reach.
Yeah. I've had a conversation with some folks out at Google about that, that'd be another topic for another time, but how people can license large language models to influence theology.
Right.
And that's actually a discussion that's going on right now.
I'd like for you to include me in your conversations from time to time, because I'm really interested in that for a couple of reasons.
Yeah. A lot of people are, and we don't even have language to really talk about it yet because it's so new,
Yep.
But you're right, it's going to have a huge impact on it. But yeah, and we do things with John and Baxter from time to time, and other friends, and Dub and his folks. We just did the Mystical Gospel Conference recently. You can probably find the videos of that through Dub, with Brian Orm, John Crowder, and me, somewhere in Texas. And
I think it was Amarillo, probably out where Dub lives, right?
Yeah,
Right,
I think it was. Yeah, it was Amarillo, I believe.
Yeah.
And then this e-course we did on the Holy Spirit with Baxter and John, if you can get that kind of on the video, and it was just gold. We got to spend 12 weeks and we listened to each other, had a discussion afterwards, and it was very rich. So those are some things you could do. I'll send you some links on that.
Thank you so much for being on this podcast, but more than that, thanks for being my brother, and thanks for being faithful.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks for thanks for going through the valleys and coming out on the other side, man.
He drugged me. He drugged me.
No, he didn't. You chased him, and I know you did.
No, he chased me, he drugged me. You see that place where the drag marks were on the beach? That was not what he carried me.
You and I are like Peter, man. When you really stop and think, where else could I go?
That's true.
Where else
Where
could
else
I
we
go?
gonna go?
I've seen this. Where else could I go, man? I'll see you on Facebook, and we'll reconnect soon. How about that, man?
All right. Great.
Be
Bless you,
blessed, my
man.
brother. Yeah.
Bye-bye.